everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Tiana Baca, and I am the Community Education Programs Director here at Three Sisters Kitchen. I'm also a local farmer and seed steward and live and farm down in the South Valley here in Albuquerque. For those of you who may or may not be familiar with Three Sisters Kitchen, we are a community food space located in the heart of downtown Albuquerque. And our work is to use the power and love of local food to create economic opportunity, to improve community health, and to bring diverse communities together around the table. And so right now, while our space is still closed to the public for in-person dining at our cafe or shopping at our local food shop, we still have a variety of classes and programs that are running virtually right now. And so if you'd like to learn more about the work that we're doing, feel free to visit our website, our social media. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram, looking at Three Sisters Kitchen, New Mexico, to find us. So today we're going to be cooking up some enchiladas, red chili enchiladas, and there are numerous ways to make these, right? And I'm sure that each of you may already have your own way. I feel like every family has something slightly different that they do. And so the recipe that I'm sharing today is from my own family. So this is something my mother and my grandmother taught to me. And as with most of the recipes that come from my family and my own cooking style, there's not necessarily a set recipe to follow, right? So it's actually a very simple dish. And because of that, it's also very intuitive, very flexible. And so the recipe I've provided is really just a baseline, right? So there's some suggestions as a starting point, but feel free to make whatever changes you like to make this dish your own. So for example, you might adjust the quantities of the ingredients depending on how many people you are feeding. You could also change up what some of the ingredients are. Today, I'm going to be showing you how to make the enchiladas using cooked ground beef, but maybe you don't want to use that, so you could add in some veggies. I particularly love chard and mushrooms as a veggie combo with red chili. So feel free, again, to change this up as you'd like. So I want to go over what we're going to need for our cooking tonight. So the first is we are going to be making our own red chili sauce to use for our enchiladas. And typically I make this using red chili pods, but for the ease of today, I'm going to show you how to make it using red chili powder. So you'll want to have some red chili powder. Let me actually switch you. You can see the cooking cam. So we'll want some red chili powder. We'll be adding an onion, perhaps some garlic if you have that. Also, I like adding in some oregano. We'll use some salt, and whatever other herbs and spices you like in your red chili. We'll want some salt, and then we'll be using a little bit of oil. I today have some grapeseed oil, but really any vegetable oil will do. And we'll also be using a little bit of flour. So I have some all-purpose flour here, and we're going to use that as the thickening agent in our chili sauce. If you are not using flour, if gluten is not your thing, you can always substitute this out for cornmeal or another type of gluten-free flour, right? So that is for the red chili sauce. In addition to that, we're going to need some corn tortillas. For the dish that we'll be making, you'll need about 9 of them for what I'm going to show you today. We'll also need some fillings. So I have some cooked up ground beef that I'm going to be adding in, and then some shredded cheese that I went ahead and grated. And you'll want 2 to 3 cups of cheese, again, for what we're making tonight. So those are the ingredients that we're going to need. And in terms of materials, you are going to want to have a baking dish. So we're making this as like an enchilada casserole. That's what my mom and my grandmother make. So I'm using a smaller dish, I don't know, like 8 by 9 or so. You'll want to have some sort of medium saucepan to be cooking our chili in, as well as having some sort of spatula, spoon, or whisk. And then if you're cooking up ground beef or something, you'll additionally want to have a skillet and spatula for that. And then finally, we'll be using cutting board and chef's knife, or whatever knife that you have available. And I think those are the main tools. If you have some measuring spoons, I have a 1 teaspoon and 1 tablespoon here. I'll give some reference to these. But as I mentioned before, these recipes can also be done kind of by eyeballing it. So I'll use those as a guide, but don't feel like you have to have them. So those are the materials we're going to be needing today. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to do is to get our oven preheated. So go ahead and turn that up to 350, 375. And then we'll take just a moment and get our hands washed before we get going. This is also a great time for you all if you are still getting your ingredients together to get those all ready. What I love about this like enchilada dish is that it's so simple. There's so many ways, other things you can add to it. And it also is a really easy way to make a meal for a lot of folks. I think that's why my mom and my grandmother have done this in this particular way, is because they have a lot of people to feed. And so it's actually a really simple dish to make a really nice meal for everyone. Great. All right, so hopefully you now have your ingredients, and oven is preheated, again, 350, 375. You know your oven best. And we're going to start today by working on our red chili sauce. So I'm going to move some of the other things out of the way so that I can show you what I am doing on the cooking cam. And great. So for the red chili sauce, we're actually going to start by dicing up an onion. So I have a small onion. I really love onion in all shapes and forms, so I'm going to use this whole onion. If you have a bigger one, you might just use half. As we're cutting this, just some tips, dealing with an onion, we have this round object. So a nice thing to do is to get a flat surface. In terms of nice safety, a little pinch and grip around the handle, right? You can see that I'm actually pinching onto the blade. That gives us the most control. And I'm going to start by cutting this onion in half from root to top. And this gives me a nice flat surface to work from then. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and cut off my ends. Just get those out of the way. Peel off the outer skin. And I actually save all of these bits that I'm trimming off. You can use the onion skins to make a vegetable broth. So I actually save all of these little bits. But now that I have this peeled, I'm going to slice it lengthwise and then come back and cut it this way. And so as I'm cutting, I'm actually going to use this kind of claw grip so that I keep my fingertips behind my knuckles. And that's a way to just ensure that I'm never actually going to cut my fingers, right? My knuckles become this guide. My fingers are safely tucked behind. And so now that I have scored them one direction, I'm going to go ahead and cut perpendicular into these nice slices. And if you are noticing onions getting caught on your knife, an easy way to scrape them off, and especially if you're working with kids, is to just grab a fork or something else, right? And you can scrape them off that way, keeping everyone safe. All right. I have pretty tiny little cutting board. So I'm just going to transfer these to a bowl so I can cut the other half. You may have space on yours and don't need to do this, but I'm just going to move those aside. And I'm going to do the same thing with this other half of onion. I'm just trimming off those very end pieces, peeling that skin off. And again, I'll save these and make a broth with them. And then cutting this into strips. And then turning that perpendicular, get all my bits together, and I can cut it the opposite way into nice slices. Okay. And if there's ever anything that like jumps out of the way, you could always come back to that, cut it into smaller pieces, navigate it that way. If onions really like get you going, make you cry, you can always rinse them a little bit under cool water, and that will help reduce the amount of the compounds that irritate our eyes. All right, so here I have my onions all diced up. I'm going to go ahead and add these to my little dish. So this becomes the base of our red chili sauce. You can also dice up some garlic right now. So if you are using perhaps fresh garlic, you could peel that and dice that up. I am actually going to be using some garlic powder that I have. So that's what I will use up. But feel free, to mix it up based on what you have. So I have my onions here. I have my saucepan. The next thing I'm going to do is get some oil forming in the bottom of that pan. Again, I eyeball this, but for the sake of giving a little bit of clarity and guidance today, I'm going to measure out about a tablespoon of oil. So I'm going to add that to the pan, turn my pan onto a medium-high heat, and just wait for that oil to actually warm. So right now, if I were to turn my pan, the oil is still pretty thick, and the way that I'll know when it's warm and ready is it'll get super slick and move faster. So I'm going to let that warm for just a moment. I'll have my onions, and again, the other things I'm going to need are some red chili powder, some flour, and any other herbs or spices. So I'll be adding oregano, a little bit of salt to mine. All right. So now as I turn my pan, the oil is moving really quickly. I know that it's nice and warm. I'm going to go ahead and add my onions. Turn it just a little bit. And I'm just going to saute these in this pan until they're slightly translucent, right? So allowing them to just become a little bit soft, and then we'll be able to add in the other ingredients. So while these are cooking, if you want to go ahead and get your chili powder and measure out a half cup. So that's what we'll be using for today. And this amount of chili we're going to add with 2.5 cups of water. And that's going to be enough sauce for this size baking pan. Okay. If you are making a larger dish and you're feeding more people, you may want to double that. But the general ratio for the powder that I tend to use is a half cup of powder to 2.5 cups of water. So a general rule of thumb. Go ahead and check on my onions. You're cooking along right now, noticing we start to get really aromatic, right? It's so in the kitchen, all those great smells. So You'll want to have, like I said, your half cup of chili powder ready. We're also going to be adding a little bit of flour to use as a thickening agent. I'll be using all-purpose whole wheat flour, but you can use a cornmeal or something like that if the gluten is not your thing. So I just want to have that ready as well. And when I'm measuring out my flour, I'm going to add a few teaspoons. So that's why I have this teaspoon measure. My onions are getting very close. They're almost ready. And so while that is still just cooking a little bit, I'm going to show you another tip that I have in terms of using the red chili powder for our sauce. You can add your chili and water and use a whisk. One thing that I find helpful is sometimes to just put the chili in a jar, add the water, and then I can shake it here. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm actually going to maybe get a funnel just so I don't spill this everywhere. But I have my half cup of chili, and then I can measure the 2.5 cups of water into this, shake it up, and that's an easy way to make sure I don't get clumped. So let's see. My onions are looking great. I'm going to turn down the heat just a little bit. And at this point, this is when I'm going to be adding my flour. So I'm going to add about 2 teaspoons worth of flour. And I'm going to mix this well with my onion mixture. And I might add just a smidge more. And so what we're doing is the flour and the oil together, they are binding, and essentially we're creating a roux. And this is the base of our sauce. So it's going to become the thickening agent here. So by adding it now, we don't get the clumps of flour. And if we just added flour, but we didn't have the oil, the fat, it wouldn't have the same like chemical reaction. So have those ready. I'm going to go ahead and just turn off the heat for a moment. And at this point, we're going to add our half cup of chili powder and 2.5 cups of water. You can either add those directly to your pan and use a whisk and stir, or you can use the jar method like I am. I already added my half cup of chili. Now I'm going to measure 2.5 cups of water. And then find my lid, then I can shake this up. I close that tightly and then shake. So this is a nice way, like I said, just to make sure everything is mixed together. Sometimes using powder, it can be harder to use a whisk. I still get clumps. So I like the jar because I can really get everything incorporated well. So as I add my liquid, if you turned off the stove, I turned off mine while I was shaking. I'm going to go ahead and turn back up my heat to medium high. I'm going to stir this in well, and I'm going to let this mixture come to a boil. So that's what I'm waiting for. So I want to bring it up to a boil. And when it actually gets to that boiling state, that's when this like chemical reaction is going to happen and it'll start to thicken. So I'm going to let it come to that state, and then I can turn the temperature down a little bit and let it simmer some more if I'd like. At this point, you can also add in the other herbs or spices that you like. So I'm going to go ahead and add some oregano, a pinch, a certain amount, right? Like this is really, do it to your taste. As I shared, these are things that my mom and my grandmother taught me. We just cook based on sight, based on that intuition of like, well, it's this much, right? That's that's what looks great. Or tasting it often, right? Like that's another, just taste things as you go. You can always add a little bit more of something. Can't take something out. So if you're not sure, try a little bit, taste it, add a little bit more if you'd like. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and let this simmer and come to a boil. I'm also remembering, I mentioned I'm using garlic powder, not fresh garlic. So I'm going to go ahead and add that mine now. Have that sitting there. All right. And while this is cooking, now is a great time to go ahead and get your other ingredients ready that we're going to be using. So as I mentioned, we'll be using some cheese. For this dish, for the size that we're making, it's about 2.5, 3 cups of cheese grated. So I went ahead and grated this up already, just so I could have it to show you. But you'll use, 2.5 to 3 cups of cheese. And then whatever other fillings you'd like. So I have some ground beef. Again, that's probably 2.5, maybe 3 cups. If you are using vegetables, this is a great time to dice them up. I have found that cooking the veggies before putting them in with the enchiladas can actually be really great. So depending on what they are, I mentioned I really love chard and mushrooms in my enchiladas. They go really great with red chili. But if I just add them in fresh and let them cook, the moisture that's in them kind of drips out. So by cooking them a little bit before and then adding them to the dish, it doesn't become so runny. Right, so go ahead and get your items. We're going to take some time here, right? We're letting our chili sauce cook. You are getting your other ingredients, your cheese and your other fillings ready. And so we're just going to take a little bit of time to allow you that spaciousness to get those items ready. And while we do so, I'll keep giving you a guide, check on your chili. But I'm also going to share a little bit of information and story around corn, right? And the corn tortillas that we're going to be using. I'm talking a little bit, just about the history of this food, where it comes from and how we get it from the farm, the field, to this place on our plate. And so I am going to, let's see if I can share my screen with you all. We can have some visuals while we're going along. And feel free, you are cooking at this time, so do what you need to. Look up on the screen as you want to, but otherwise I will just guide you with my voice. And actually right now I'm noticing my chili is just starting to come to a boil. I'm going to give that a good stir and then turn down the heat just a little bit. So now that it's come to a boil, I just want it to simmer for a few minutes. Okay. So as we, work on our dish, get everything ready, to talk about corn, I want to give a little foundation to this particular plant, and talk a little bit about the ecology and the processing. How did it get, like I said, from the field to our plate? These photos that we have here on the screen are actually photos of corn, some Rio Grande blue corn from my farm in this past summer. And you can see some other photos of them growing throughout the year. So corn has many different names: corn, maize. Its botanical name is Zea maize. And corn is related to other plants such as wheat and sorghum and oats. These are all actually technically grasses. So they are part of a larger plant family called the Poaceae plant family. That's who they're related to. But corn ancestor is actually a tropical grass known as Teosinte. And so on the screen, you can see an image of Teosinte, this tropical grass, as well as an image of modern corn. So Teosinte, you can see, has this really grassy, very much more shrub-like structure. And the seeds on this are quite a bit smaller than a modern corn cob, a little bit more triangular in shape. And there was really only one row of kernels, okay? And so this tropical grass is what indigenous peoples in the area that we know and call Mexico at this point. This is the tropical grass those indigenous communities domesticated and were in relationship with to bring us to modern corn. So they have been in this relationship with this plant for centuries. Corn was domesticated about 9,000 to 10,000 years ago. And you can see in this other photo, right, the difference going from diocente to modern corn. We have a change in the way that the plant looks as a whole. Its sort of structure is more upright, one branch. And we also have fewer seed heads, which we call cobs of corn. And you can see that instead of that one singular row of seed, we actually have a whole cob full of seeds, right? And so it's really neat to see how this has emerged over time. And now corn has also moved throughout the globe, but has moved throughout the Americas within our region, right? So this has been a significant crop and was something that was cultivated prior to colonization and continues to be cultivated. And another piece of this that I want to share that ties into our meal that we're making today is how this plant is processed, right? So we have it growing and we bring it in. We can just eat corn, right? Nice corn on the cob is delicious. But there's also a processing technique known as nixtamalization, which I have written on another slide. You'll be able to see that in a moment. But nixtamalization is the process of taking lime or ash, right? So pickling lime. So you're creating an alkaline solution. So for example, when I look at my bag of tortillas that I'm using today, it says ingredients, corn, water, and lime. And it doesn't mean lime like the fruit lime, the citrus, but it means lime as in the pickling lime. And so what we do is we can use those ingredients to create this alkaline solution that we soak the corn in. And this removes the outer kernel, the seed coat, and it's causing a chemical change that's changing nutrition and also making this corn safer to eat. So there's lots of different molds and things that can grow while corn is growing. But by nixtamalizing that, we get rid of almost all of the toxins that could potentially exist. And we also have some nutritional changes. So this process of nixtamalization, we can use to get to a bowl of pozole, that you see on the screen. But it's also the process that we take to get to our corn tortillas. Right? So when we are eating whole corn and we haven't processed it, it has some carbohydrates, some fiber, and some quantities of iron and vitamin C. But when we nixtamalize the corn, we have additional calories that become available. And that's because there's additional carbohydrates, proteins, and fat that become available through this process. We also have higher quantities of calcium, iron, zinc, folate, and other B vitamins that become available during the process of nixtamalization. So as we think about corn and the dish that we're making, I love just thinking about this whole story, right? Like, how did this plant come to be in my life, in my field, in my belly? But it's not just like the plant itself, right? But it's a whole relationship of foodways and cultural traditions and wisdom and knowledge that are also part of it, right? And so with that, we will come back all together. If you have not already been checking on your red chili sauce, now's a great time to do so. Mine is thickening up beautifully, looking really good. I'm going to turn that off. And we're going to go ahead and get to assembling. So putting all of our goodies together. When I bake these enchiladas, because everything is pre-cooked, it's really just a matter of heating it through, getting all of the cheese to melt. And so that can be about a half an hour or so. We're not going to go through that whole process together. I'm going to show you some that I made earlier that are nice and ready. But I'll show you just how I assemble these, and then you can get yours in the oven. So let's see. I'm going to bring some things back over to the table so I can show you on the cooking cam. But I'm getting together my baking dish, my meat, my cheese, my chili. Probably want a hot pad to move my chili pan. All right. And let's get to looking at putting this all together. So to start my dish, I'm actually going to just add in a little bit of sauce at the bottom of the pan. And hopefully this steam from the chili doesn't make it too hard for you to see. But I'm just putting a little bit on the pan. This will help keep things from sticking when I take it out later. And then I'm going to add a layer of tortillas. So I'm using about 3 tortillas per layer. And the first 2, I'm breaking in half, right? So I'm just folding them and breaking it in half and kind of providing the edges of my dish. Then I'm going to take the whole one, just put it over the middle. Depending on the size and shape of your dish, you may have some very different numbers or different ways to fill that in. There's no exact number. It's just whatever makes sense for your dish. At this point, so I pre-cooked my meat, so it's nice and cool, so it's easy for me to touch this, but you could use a spoon. But I'm just going to put in a layer of meat. If you were adding veggies, this is when you would put it in. And then I'm going to put about a third of my cheese mixture here. Just getting that evenly sprinkled. And now, before I layer the next set of tortillas, I'm going to add more chili. And so this, again, I'll end up using probably all of this here. The tortillas, because they're in here, they're going to soak up some of this chili while it's cooking in the oven, right? So you don't want to have dry enchiladas. That's not as tasty. So I like adding plenty of red chili in here. And once I've added my red chili, now I'm going to go ahead and do my second layer of corn tortillas, right? And so for my dish, I'm doing that by breaking 2 in half to create the edges of my pan, and then ta-da, 1 in the middle just to cover that up. Then I'll add the next portion of my meat mixture. And I'm only doing these 2 main layers. I'm going to use that all up and then add the next third of my cheese. And then I'll be adding my chili, right? So I know, as I said, there's so many different ways to make enchiladas, and you can have rolled enchiladas and stacked. And this, like I said, is this like casserole kind of dish. And I think about like, where did my mom and my grandmother, why did they decide to make it this way? And I'm sure there's lots of different things that have infused and influenced them over the years. I know in part just having big families, like putting something together like this, we can feed a lot of people really quickly. It's not a whole lot of work, but this is a lot of food right here in this one little pan, right? So I imagine in many ways that's definitely one of the reasons that they have done it this way. So again, I have my final layer, and I use 3 tortillas for this dish, kind of just covering the edges, covering the center. And at this point, I'm going to actually put chili. I really want to cover all of the tortilla so that it's not exposed. I don't want that to get crispy. I want it to be nice and tender. I'm going to just tuck those edges in. I don't have much left. So I'm going to add all of my chili sauce. Right. So the sauce that we made up makes about 3 cups. And so that's, I've used all of that in this one pan. And then finally, I'm going to top this off with the remainder of cheese. And ta-da! There we have it. So this dish, I'm now going to go ahead and put into my oven. I'm going to take the other one out. So this is going in. And again, my oven was at about 350, 375. And I will bring over so you can see. This was got a little darker on the top. You can see, right, like this is nice cooked, it's all bubbly. So this is what it will look like as it comes out of the oven. And I usually let that sit for a few minutes before we actually serve it. Okay. So thank you all so much for taking some time to learn my family's recipe for making enchiladas, and for also exploring a little bit about the ecology and history of corn. And hopefully we will see you all in person at the Sister's Kitchen sometime later this year. Thank you all so much.